Everybody is talking about agents these days. You hear taglines like, I have 10 agents working for me 24/7. I have a swarm of agents working for me while I sleep. Here's the thing. So while agents are indeed powerful, I think that the way that it's marketed right now and the way that people are talking about it doesn't quite reflect what they actually are. And when you hear taglines like that, it can be very anxiety inducing and it conjures up images of this robot that's sitting behind a computer desk and that's kind of just tapping away and working autonomously. Something like this. In this video, I want to break down what an agent actually is, some things that you might actually want to use it for, and just get grounded in some like real use cases for agents. And here's the punchline. So it's very, very simple, very, very easy, and it's actually very accessible to anyone, even without any technical knowledge. So first, I want to get grounded in some numbers because it's easy to feel anxious and left behind when you hear all of this magic happening. And a lot of it really is just marketing hype. This was some research conducted last year, but the numbers haven't changed too much since. And I want to give you some quick context of where things actually stand. So Carnegie Mellon did a study and they found that the best performers, the best agents were actually only able to complete their task about 24% of the time. Now, this is for some of the more sophisticated workflows. There are agents that people build for daily use, and this is what I'll get into. But the actual production usage of AI agents is not quite there yet. And another study by Gartner found that although there were thousands of people claiming to sell agents, only about 130 of them actually were. The rest were really just chatbots with new labels. Deloitte found that only 11% of organizations were actually using agents in production. So I present these numbers to say, if you haven't started working with agents, you're actually not that far behind. I think people are still really at the early stages of experimenting and seeing what agents are capable of. So it's a good time to start getting into it now. So now let me explain what agents actually are. And I'll start with the definition. Not a definition from me, this is straight from Anthropic. So agents are typically just LLMs using tools based on environment feedback in a loop. Now that's still a bit of jargon, so let me translate. So an agent basically just has 4 parts, and to make it a little bit easier to understand, I want to use an analogy. So the first part, the system prompt, you can think of as a recipe. So a recipe is just some set of instructions. When you're writing an agent file, it's just a text file. And all it does is it just describes what the agent should do and how to do it. The next part, which is the brain, the LLM, you can think of as the chef that's actually executing on the recipe. So depending on what large language model you use, it could be Claude, GPT, Gemini. So this is the brain. It reads the recipe and decides what to do. The next part is the tools. And again, back to the kitchen analogy. These are just the tools that are available in the kitchen for the chef to use. And this is just a description of when you're following the recipe, these are the specific tools that you should use for each step. Similar to how you might tell a chef exactly what tool to use for each part of the recipe. And the final part, which is the loop, and this is where the word agent actually comes from. And this is the difference between a regular chatbot and an agent. So a regular chatbot, you ask it a question, it responds, and that's done. That's just basically a one shot. So an agent, you give it a task, and it basically keeps going until it decides that it is complete. So the steps are, it'll take a look at the task or the recipe. The chef will decide what to do next. It might use a tool. And then it'll look at the result and say, okay, am I done with the recipe? If not, it'll go back and say, okay, I'm going to use the next tool. It'll take the results and eventually it'll complete the task. And that's basically an agentic workflow. And that's it. That's really the architecture behind all of the major agents that you see, like Claude, Cursor, Codex. All of them really just follow this same pattern. So I want to get a little technical now because this part was super interesting to me when I broke down how the most popular agent, which is Claude Code, it's a coding agent, actually works underneath the hood. So when you're working with Claude Code, you might give it a task and say you want to implement a new feature. So what happens in this loop is it'll take the task and it'll decide what to do next. So the first step might be something like read all the files in your code base to understand everything that you've built so far and how to implement the feature. So the first action is a tool call. And once it executes the tool call, it'll take the results of that and feed it back into the conversation. And at this point, it'll decide whether or not it's done. Obviously, the first step is just reading files, so it's not done. So it goes back and it says, okay, now that I've read the files, what is the next step? The next step might be to start writing things or creating some new files. So it sends all of that back as a new set of tool calls. It'll execute those tool calls, and then it takes all of those results and it'll decide whether or not it's done. If it requires more tool calls, it'll go back and it'll kind of go through this loop until it decides that it's done. So what's actually happening under the hood here? It may seem like magic, but really all it is a while loop. So you call the LLM with your messages and you get some response back from Claude. Now the response has several parts to it. It'll have the message itself, some metadata, and it will have something like a list of tool calls that it should do. So if the response has remaining tool calls to do, it'll execute all of those tool calls. It'll take the results of those, add those to the message, and continue this loop. So the deciding factor of when an agent stops, or in this case, when Claude stops, is that there are no more additional tool calls to use. So when you get a response back and there are no more tool calls, it simply sends the message, and that's how Claude knows when to exit the loop. So I wanted to demonstrate this mostly because, again, like when I first started researching and looking into agents, I thought there was a lot of magic, things that I didn't understand. And without an understanding of it, I felt really anxious working with it. And once I really broke down and understood what's actually happening, it gave me a much more grounded view of agents, and there's a certain level of comfort that comes from actually understanding what's happening. So now that I've talked about what an agent is and how they work, I want to get into some real examples of what you might actually want to use an agent for. And to demonstrate this, I want to show you what an agent file actually looks like. And this is the part that you would actually write, and this is basically all that an agent is. So let's say you're a freelancer and you want to create an agent that offloads some of the tasks that you do on a daily basis. And this is a very good use case. Basically, you have something that you do repeatedly, and it's something that you can explain to an agent how to do. So the anatomy of an agent file is you give it an identity, you give it some context of what you are and what you do. So you are a freelancer, and this is what you normally do on a daily basis. And the workflow, this is where you describe the recipe, or you tell the agent step-by-step instructions on how to automate this task. So for example, as a freelancer, one of your main responsibilities might be responding to client inquiries. So a workflow might be a new email arrives with this label. The agent will read the email. It will check services.md, and this is a file where you list all your services. And if yes, you pull examples, check the calendar to see if you have slots, draft some kind of response using your template and voice. So obviously you can customize all of this based off of your actual workflow, but this is just an example of some of the things that you might want an agent to do. So after you define the workflow, you might give it some tools and exactly how you want it to do certain things. If you use Gmail, there are some Gmail integrations. You can give instructions on how to use your calendar. And you might even add in some response guidelines, like of how you want to respond to emails. And again, you don't actually have to write all of this yourself. You can talk to a chatbot and kind of just brainstorm and just say, I want to create an agent to automate this task that I do on a daily basis. And it will brainstorm with you and create this all for you. So you don't actually have to write out line by line what it does. So the key insight here is you already know how to write instructions. And that's really the hard part of building an agent, and it's something that you've already been doing your entire life. And now that you have your agent files, there are various ways you can actually deploy or put your agent into action. I won't get into that in this video. I'll create a separate video on how you can actually deploy the agent. Again, it's very, very simple. You can probably set it up in 5 to 10 minutes. But again, that'll be in a separate video. So to kind of just wrap things up, I think there's a quote that captures the essence of what I've been talking about here. And it's from the CEO of Zapier. He says, when most people say they want an agent, you realize they actually just want a workflow. So the next time you hear someone talking about AI agents, I hope you don't tune it out and say, this is not for me. Now that you have an understanding of what AI agents actually are, I hope that you won't be intimidated by the jargon. At the end of the day, an agent is really just some instructions, a tools, and a loop. It's a text file that tells an agent what to do, connected to things that actually lets it do stuff, and it runs in a loop until it's done. And that's it. It's not magic. It's not sci-fi. It's just a really useful pattern that you can actually start using today. If you want a tutorial on how you can create and deploy your agent, be sure to subscribe. I'll be creating a lot more videos like this and walk you through step-by-step creating your very first agent. So thank you for watching. I hope that was helpful, and I'll see you in the next video.